today on the podcast, I'm excited to have David and Megan Roche on the podcast. Welcome to the show, guys.
Woohoo! Thanks so much for having us on here.
Yeah, thank you so much. We admire you immensely, and it's just an honor to finally get to talk to you on here.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have you guys on, and when we decided to do this little coaching series, it's like, okay, perfect time. When I interviewed Claire Gallagher, we talked about you guys a little bit in that episode, and now I'm super bummed because I have on my list to read Happy Runner, and I haven't yet, and I'm really mad at myself right now.
Oh no, this is perfect. The mystery adds to the allure. So let's go with that.
That's such a big deal, though, that you guys, I mean, beyond everything else we're going to talk about, you are authors. That's a big deal. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Well, we wrote that book sitting in this lazy boy in our 300 square foot studio apartment in California. So it was very much just like a journey and grinding away. And honestly, it feels like a long time ago that we wrote that.
And Megan and I, like when we first met, talked about like a rule that we say yes to things really quickly. And so we said yes to something, and then we're like, what did we just commit to? At the time we were like, we don't even know what we're supposed to be talking about here. Does the world need a running book from us? So we tried to make it a totally different thing where it was just like, starting from the premise of, you are amazing, whoever's reading this. And that doesn't mean that you accomplished something. That means that, you're living, you're showing your spirit, all these other things. And so we went from there. So it turned into like this Buddhist on mushrooms related to book. So I'll take it. I mean,
it was fun to write together, though. Yeah. I feel like we learned a lot about each other in that process and editing each other and going back and forth in our works of writing.
That's so true. I learned so much from you.
How did that work, though? Like, are different chapters written by one of you and other chapters written by the other? Or do you go back and say, hey, I don't like how you said that? What does that look like?
Should we release our secrets? We've never discussed this before. I'll be honest. I think we're all about honesty here. Different chapters were written by different people, but I think we edited so much between the two of us that it's probably hard to tell who wrote what. But I'd be curious. I think people might be able to.
We were unsure what our voice was too when we started writing. I think we found our voice in the context of writing, and now we're much more confident with putting out the message we put out. So when we were writing, everything started as this raw material that ended up just getting shaped in such a different way that I think it was all it all got mixed together so much that it was like a gumbo,
I wish we could save the editing comment bubbles that we made back and forth to each other, because we had some great dialogues and certainly a lot of expletives and going back and forth with each other.
No, yeah. I think Megan was super patient with my my attempts at jokes on the first round. I think the first edit, like the first cut of that book, with the unedited jokes probably would have gotten us canceled like 10 times over. So I'm greatly appreciative to my best editor here, in addition to my partner.
Well, it's good to be married to someone that can be totally honest with you, right?
Oh my God.
We had some brutally honest comments back and forth, but I actually told David, I was like, I feel like you're just tossing some jokes in here, so I'll take them out. That way it like makes the editing process easier, so I have something to edit.
With writing, they say kill your darlings when it comes to editing. And so I just was like, maybe this is my darling. No, Megan, she also does the same for me on every article I ever write, where she comes in and not only, does with her scientific background, make sure that all that's airtight, but mostly comes in and checks all of my attempts to insert humor into places where there should not be humor. So, but yeah, I mean, and I think the book was where we really found that. I thought we found a much deeper partnership, and, I think the book would be slightly different now, but only because we wrote that first one. And so, yeah, I'm really happy we said yes, even though it turned into like a little bit wilder ride than we were bargaining for.
And you're so right. You guys said yes to this podcast right away, too. It's just part of your life motto.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a little different. That's like, do you want to win the lottery? Yes or no?
Yeah. That was easy, yes.
We're not going to be like, well, we'll wait till next week to win the lottery. It's like, no, we want it now.
I think our motto is we'll say yes and then figure it out. And oftentimes we've had some adventures figuring it out.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I think that if we write another book, maybe we'll just call it Figuring It Out.
I like that.
I love that. That's so good. You guys will most definitely write another book. I totally see it. And I think that authors say that a lot. They're like, oh, if I would have done this, now opposed to then, like these are all the things I would have done differently, but that's what the second book is for.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of, you kind of mentioned Megan bringing in her scientific background. One thing I want to talk about before we really get into the coaching stuff is your backgrounds, because I think it's so interesting that, David, you are a lawyer, and Megan, you went to med school, you're a doctor, but then you chose a different path after graduating. And so I would love to hear you guys kind of talk about how you found your way into the career that you're in today.
David's pointing his fingers at me first.
Yeah, she's the one that's like an astronaut. So let's start with her.
No. Yeah, so I went to med school, and during the process of med school, I was studying so much that David, when he was a lawyer, was like, I need something else to do. He's like, I need something to do while you're studying. And so that's how he started the swap coaching business. And I think my third year of medical school, I actually started coaching with swap. And I just loved coaching so much. I found I learned more from the athletes I was coaching, honestly, than I even learned in medicine. Like, it was just like a beautiful mix of physiology and psychology and life philosophy all in one. So ultimately decided to defer going to residency, and am now doing a PhD in epidemiology while coaching. And it's funny, when I started epidemiology, most people didn't know what epidemiology was. And now it's become much more relevant in this COVID-19
And your
world.
epidemiology research is largely focused on running, which I think is super cool because it feeds back into everything else. Like what are some of the things you're...
So epidemiology is essentially population health, and I feel lucky in that I got to choose athletes as my population. So I look at the genetics of sports injury. I look at bone stress injuries, RED-S. Right now I'm doing some mental health and COVID-19 related studies in athletes. And so it's been fun to bring that athletic focus into the science work that I do and kind of just like intermix everything.
Yeah, Megan is so smart. Like it's so funny when she was saying that timeline, I'm looking back at the development of Some Work, All Play, like the people we coach and stuff. And even though we coach people separately, we always are talking about it. And where she joined is like a seismic shift in the trajectory of it all. And I think it's because, one, she lifts up like emotionally and stuff, but two, it's just, she brings in a critical mind that is like makes everything when it comes to running training and developing athletes long term make more sense. Not just make sense in like an empirical methodological way, but make sense in a cellular way, a genetic way, all the different type of systems that we're looking at physiologically. So yeah, I'm always like, Megan, does this thing make sense? And she's like, David, here are 8 studies that are about that thing. And so it's been great to learn from each other.
Well, thanks. Well, it's been fun. I think often we have these conversations over dinner. We'll just be like sitting there eating pasta, talking about random things related to coaching and science and physiology. So it's really fun to have a partner who's doing this too.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's a full package. You don't see that a lot. That you have two different, very different people, but you also have this like medical background that most running coaches just simply don't have. I mean, you can do research on your own, but you are trained, and clearly interested in this. And if I were an athlete being coached by you, I would feel I would trust you with my questions because, yeah, I mean, most coaches just don't have that background. It's a big deal. So I'm curious, David, like, how do you learn from Megan as far as that stuff goes? Like, because you started coaching first before her. So, like, you were already interested in the physiology, I'm sure, and all these things, but you've clearly learned a lot from her. So, what does that look like?
So we had always like coached each other, and gone back and forth on these topics. And I think
through a lot of trial and error.
I'll add. In many different ways. And so, I think it gets back to our backgrounds initially in that Megan went to college to play field hockey. I went to college to play football way back in the day. So we were coming at it as blank slates where we had an idea of what the overarching framework was of running training, but only in a very 2 steps out. Like we were looking through a keyhole at the running training world. But I think that was the ultimate blessing because we took nothing as like dogma that you couldn't break. So everything we learned anew. So, we started from scratch, like as we started out, and then it got more and more into it. And, then once I've always been a science guy, in overall. And then when I was a lawyer and doing public interest environmental law, Megan was like, when I came to her, I was like, Megan, you're working at 10 p.m. at night right now. I want to support you. I want to be here with you. I don't want to just be watching Netflix and making you feel bad. And she's like, David, coaching is always been your calling. And, so she encouraged me making that leap. And then from there, it's like anything else in life, you just do it, you grind. And I think that if anything characterizes us as like coaches, as like behind the scenes, what we're doing on our end, it's like not being afraid of the grind. We're gonna try to work as hard as we can, every day we can, to learn what we can, but also to understand what we don't know and let curiosity guide us. And so what Megan showed me is that not knowing things is a blessing, and it's something to lean into, and you fill those gaps little by little, rather than being like, I have all these gaps filled, and if I'm contradicted in something, it's because something is wrong. It's like, no, we're learning as we go. And so I hope we're a better coach 6 months from now than we are right now. And I can't even imagine where we were 7 years ago, So,
well, I think real quick, what I've learned from and what I've seen from you is that you've taken your law degree and you've taken the process of doing legal research and applied that to running in a way that I haven't seen anyone do before. And I really appreciate that. So David writes for Trail Runner magazine, and he's able to do lit searches on scientific articles related to running physiology so fast. And I can see that law background coming in. And it's really neat to think about how you've integrated that background into what you do today. And I mean, it's faster research than I've seen anyone do. And it's like fully comprehensive too at the same time. And so it's cool to see you work all of that into coaching.
Yeah. So I hope we're kind of like, the Power Rangers in that they would all put their fists in the middle and become the Megazord at the end. So, I hope we're kind of like a two-person little somewhere, and then incorporating all of our.
The pink Power Ranger?
I don't know. we might have to have rock, paper, scissors for pink. But hopefully we can do that along with our friends and mentors and everyone else.
That's so good. My kids will appreciate your Power Rangers reference. We have that on a lot in my house.
It's still a thing?
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yes. And in the evenings, I'm like, guys, we're not doing Power Rangers. It's too loud. There's too much going on. We need something quiet. Yep, my kids love the Power Rangers. I know. I didn't know it was still a thing either until, my kids were old enough to watch it.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so what I love so much about this is that, well, two things. One, if I were you, Megan, like working at 10 p.m. at night, this is a flaw in me. And my husband was sitting around watching Netflix because he'd worked all day, but he was done and he could just hang out. I could see myself being resentful. Like, I'm like working my ass off all the time. But I'm hearing that you probably weren't resentful like me, and that you were encouraging David when he said, I want to, step up and do something too. And the other side of that, I love, David, that you were like, well, I don't want to just like sit around and do nothing while you're working all the time, where I think a lot of people would just like really enjoy that downtime. That's really unique that you guys did that.
Yeah, I think for me, what sets David apart is that he is one of the more efficient people I've met in the world. So if David puts in a solid 8 hours of work, it's like equivalent to 12 hours of normal people work. So he has fully earned that Netflix time. But I think what I saw was that he just was like a born coach. I think there's certain people that have that mentality. And when David told me about this idea for coaching, it just fit. Like I could see him translating this passion towards coaching and just like running with it. And that's what he did. And it was so cool to see.
Yeah, but it was never supposed to be what it is now, right?
Sure.
Like it was a total accident. I said this to Megan and then was like, hey, how do you think about this turn of phrase? Some work, all play. And she's like, whatever. That's great. Sounds awesome to me. I like it. Megan is the most, And
you're like, I'm going to set up a .blogspot website, which is a great platform for launching a business.
Yeah. And I was like, I'll coach anyone for free. And then put out a Facebook post, and like, I actually went back and like deleted some old social media history because I'm like, that stuff is cringeworthy now. Like to look back and be like, I'll coach anyone for free. I don't really, I'm new. So, who knows what's going to happen. I think we're really thankful the most is for the people that believed in us. That includes our athletes mostly, but also everyone outside that. Like, it's so easy to want to like tear someone down or cut someone off at their root, no matter what that world is. Like I could see other coaches being like, who is this guy? Why does he think he can do this? Whatever. And fortunately, we didn't have to face too much of that, at least like out in the open.
And the first athletes joined, bless their souls.
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know. And most of them are still around, which is so cool. I was going back and like there's athletes that are like day 3,000 of their training log or whatever the number is, that had great results on FKTs this past weekend. And it's just such a moment of reflection of like, going all in for other people too, like other people doing that for us, and hopefully they know that we'll do that for them too, and that's kind of what we hope to do with coaching is like, and that's the one like seed that was planted then, that even while everything else has changed stays, is like we can't promise much, like we don't know the future, and we don't know everything, but like we can promise like as close as we can get to unconditional support.
Okay, so let's talk about it, but first, real quick, what coaching platform do you use?
We just use Google Drive spreadsheets.
Do you? That's a lot of
Yeah,
work.
so the reason we use spreadsheets is we like it to be more of a life conversation in addition to a training like platform or dialogue. So we have one whole cell that's dedicated to life conversation, and often that's the biggest cell that athletes are writing. And that contains the most.
I'll look over Megan's shoulder sometimes, and we keep everything confidential unless it's specifically said it can be shared among both of us. But I'll see like people will write like diary, like full like entries, and it's because that's amazing, it's trust and friendship and everything built up, but our main idea is like we want to try to take away as much of the barriers in communication as possible. And so some of the platforms are great, but for some athletes there might be a slight barrier there. So we totally would use a platform, I think, if it wasn't working as it is. But right now, like our main thing as coaches, we're like, we want them to know that we're communicating all the time in the most efficient way possible, rather than like wanting them to upload every GPS file that we need to see. It's like we'll get what we need from Strava, and do the other types of things in more qualitative ways than necessarily trying to put it all into boxes.
So they log it on the spreadsheet as well, and then, or do you just follow them on Strava and you check their logs that way?
So we have a bunch of different columns within our spreadsheet. One contains like the training plan that we have for the athletes, that will list like the, whatever workouts they have or easy runs or whatever. And then they write what they actually did. And then they write, there's like a column for injuries, a column for like how the workout went, and then a column for life. And it's fun to see how athletes distribute things across all of those different columns. Sometimes there's like pictures that show up in there, or jokes, or all kinds of things.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think some of the logs could be published books and be bestsellers. Like it's amazing to see people's brilliance shine in ways that they might not get to as an accountant or whatever their life, or a teacher or a stay-at-home parent or whatever their job is. So it's really fun to see people's spirits shine through daily contact. And I think that's how we try to do it, is as close to every single day as we can, like because that builds the intimacy and trust that we hope to like be like a backbone of what we're doing. Is like, if people are writing all that stuff to Megan, that comes probably, I'm guessing, because Megan she showed up for 500 days in a row or whatever it is.
I love that so much. I love so many things about that. And I love that you say that it could be a book, what they write. I was typing out like an Instagram post, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I said something, and I don't know, somehow I called myself a writer, and my husband was just making fun of me, like dogging on me. He's like, "You're not a writer. What are you talking about?" I was like, "I am a writer. I am putting so much thought into what I'm writing right here, and it's an Instagram post, but I am a writer, damn it."
Oh my God. Actually, I love that point. And I to everyone listening, you are a writer if you write, just like you are a runner if you run, or you view yourself in that way. And whether it's Ernest Hemingway or someone that's just starting out, like we're all practicing, putting ourselves out there and expressing our genuine spirit. And so some people's genuine spirit will intersperse with practice to be a best-selling author because that's what they want to do. For other people, it leads to the most beautiful blog posts or the most beautiful Instagram posts. Like I'll read Instagram and be like, wow, that is incredible. And, so while it's one reason why we try not to emphasize the idea of a book too much, because books are great and all, but that was luck and circumstance that led to a book that sells some copies. Like, what I am much more proud of are Megan's Instagram posts, or like my weekly articles, are the things that are just a product of putting yourself out there when there's nothing like coming the other way.
Well, I think the thing with Instagram too, it's actually very challenging, like distilling, like capturing all of the points that you want to make into a single paragraph along with a photo, and like really getting at like the honest, real truth of the day or the experience or whatever it is challenging. Like me, like after we wrote a book, that's some of the hardest writing is like figuring out how to be authentic, how to be real, but also in like 200 words or less. And that's a real challenge.
Oh,
and I think
so
art
true.
art is just like being like, okay, this is this thing called existence and this is how I experience it. And that goes for like writing, goes for actual paintings and things. It goes for rap music or whatever you're into. And that's what's so cool about like your Instagram post is like, this is life as I experience it right now. And I hope that that's kind of what the blog allows people to do is, you know, fill in that gap in their lives to a certain extent, if that's meaningful to them. And I mean, right now, there's 3 athletes on the team. I'm like, you need to start writing a book. Don't worry about a publisher. This is an absolute necessity in the world. And so actually, one of them's at our house right now, working, who's downstairs right now. And I'm just like, you need to write a book. Like this world needs to know your story, needs to have your voice. And so, yeah, we say a lot of things outside of running in the context of a coaching relationship.
I mean, do we get to know who you're talking about?
Oh yeah, she'll be able to do that.
So?
Yeah. So Amelia Boone comes over and hangs out with us on Tuesdays. So we have in this new work from home COVID atmosphere, she's our work buddy on Tuesdays. And our dog Addie, like I feel like she knows when it's Tuesday. She's like, Amelia's coming. This is gonna be a great day.
It's Addie's workout Tuesday because she flexes the love muscle so much.
Yeah.
I thought it might be her when you said that because I don't know what I was looking at one of your Instagrams earlier when I was like kind of prepping for this and you were talking about your new podcast and she was like, does it count that I'm a guest because I was downstairs while you were something like that while you're recording it? Speaking of your podcast, I listened to a couple episodes today and I heard you were, you know, talking about Lizzo. So do you guys like rap music? What kind of music do you like?
We like all music. We love Lizzo. I think so. We sometimes drive from California to Colorado just because we live in both states, and I think we've done that drive purely on Lizzo before. So we're fans, but we like all music. I mean, I think I'm pretty open to everything. We said this on our podcast yesterday, except for country music. But yeah, we definitely share a lot of playlists with each other.
Yeah, not embarrassing. I own this. I listened to WAP like 100 times in a row on my run today.
What is it?
Is that how you say it?
I don't know. WAP. I don't. This is probably going into places that are outside my pay grade. But you know, the Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion song that came out.
Okay.
That is the ultimate greatest song of the moment. So yeah, I mean, but I think it gets back to how we try to experience life in general. It's like understand that like some things may not be for us, right? Like written directly for us. Like country music, for example, just because we don't like it doesn't mean that it's not brilliant in its own way. And for whatever reason, I think both of us see rap music or Megan has a really sophisticated music taste and she sees all genres as like speaking to some experience. And so it's super cool. And so, yeah, if the listeners know the song I'm talking about, they'll think that's very funny in the context of how I'm breaking it.
Something I love with music too is I spend a lot of my life brainstorming like ideal band names. And so I have a thing for thinking about really creative band names. So I'll be out there running, thinking about like how to string together 3 random words to make a fun band name.
I love it.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, I keep talking about it on the podcast, but I just finished Daisy Jones and the Six. Have you read the book?
No.
It's so good. It's like about a band in the 60s and it has all the members in the band talking throughout the book. But they talk about the songwriting a lot in the book and I already appreciate music a lot. My husband and I are big music people, but now I'm like just feeling it even more because every single song is like written about, you know, like I'm listening to Taylor Swift a lot right now and I'm like every single thing she writes is just like literally about her actual life and it's so cool. I'm like that you put that out there to the world. You're like sharing your life through your music.
Oh, I love that. And the creative process in general, like we try to encourage everyone. It's like create. That doesn't mean that you're creating a piece of writing or music or anything. It just means you're living your life in a way that opens yourself to the world. So just go for it. Like, don't worry if it's any good, like, or whatever good means, because that's totally not up to you.
Yeah, I think what we love is just figuring out like the creative process and seeing how different people go about diving into that creative process. And what I love with music these days is like through YouTube and social media, people who are really talented can shine. And that's how Lizzo got started. Like she was a YouTube star. And it's cool to think about how it's just like the combination of creativity and hustle and just like putting yourself out there. And it's fun to follow that process in musicians or artists or whatever.
Yeah. And just like what we tell athletes that do this because like are doing this outside of running, even though running could be an act of creation, it's like to try to disconnect the act itself from how it's received or whatever your end goals with it might be or any of that stuff, because that honestly, that's just a game of chance and it's totally not up to you. And even if it was, it's not going to lead to happiness anyway. So just go for it. Shoot that shot, not because you're going to make the shot, but because the whole point is to shoot it.
So good. I know I always say that to people when they ask me about starting podcasts. I'm like, it's fine if you want your podcast to end up being a business and all these things, but like you have to start your podcast or whatever it is you want to do because you love doing that thing. It has to be because you love it first, because the end goal is not going to matter regardless if it's successful or not, if it's not something that you enjoy doing. So it's so true.
I love that. Actually, we've been recording our podcast, and I've told David, it's like, even if we don't release these, like I would just love to sit down and have a half-hour conversation with you about journal articles or like whatever it is we prepared. And, I'm really grateful that we said yes to the podcast.
Oh yeah, I love it. Most of my hardest laughs in the last few weeks have been jokes Megan has made on the podcast where I'm like totally taken by surprise by it. And you're in that heightened state of awareness, like that everyone's in when you're on a podcast. And I'm just like absolutely blown away that I got so lucky to marry someone that like would put themselves out there, but also just like blow my humor out of the water. So I love it.
I totally hear what you're saying there. My husband and I, we record an episode a month on my Patreon page. And every time we do it, I'm like, that was so fun. Like we just get to chat and talk and, the people over there get to listen, but it ends up being just a really good time for the two of us to have uninterrupted conversation.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was telling David, I think I've learned like from the podcast, and we've only done, I think we're on episode 9 now, so we haven't done very many together, but I think we've actually gotten better at listening to each other, because it's like, at first we started with like all these points. It was like, here's X, Y, and Z we're going to hit. And I think we realized that like, if we just like free flow it works a lot better. And as a result, like I think we've been listening to each other more on the podcast, but also more in life too. And it's been fun to see that translate outside of the podcast setting.
Wait, what did you say?
Yeah, because I totally hear what you're saying, because like structure is good, but if you like stick to that, and especially because you guys are doing those like strictly 30 minutes, that leaves you not much room to like what just pops up. And sometimes the stuff that you just like randomly say that you think of on the spot ends up being the best material.
And I think for us, like the unplanned jokes, it just feels like way more natural.
Yeah, we're big fans of improv comedy too. And, just the idea that like a lot of the coolest moments happen. I mean, I would say most of life's really most magical moments don't happen with like a 10-point plan. Right. And that's not just comedy or podcasts, it's everything. And that gets back to the coaching that Megan was describing. It's like, I am so lucky that I had no idea where it was going, because I think that like allowed it to become this thing that, I'm really proud of, in a way that like, if I had tried to plan it all out, I probably would have undercut myself like 18 times over. So, I think that probably goes for everything.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about some work, all play. Give everybody just like the concept of what your coaching looks like.
So adventure, fast, and lifelong support. So, at the end of the day, we don't really care necessarily whether an athlete gets faster or accomplishes any of these, goals that are maybe meaningful, but in the grand scheme of things may not. What we care about way more is that they're, constantly putting themselves out there, getting vulnerable, and practicing their self-belief. And then they can then bring that into other parts of life, whether that is, you're at a world championships in running for a pro athlete, or an athlete that's doing their first 5K.
And what I like to think about too is that I refer to it as a co-coaching journey. So I like athletes to coach alongside with me in that journey, because I think like empowering athletes to learn the science, to understand the physiology, to ask why they're doing what they're doing helps with motivation to get out the door, but it also like helps them problem solve and troubleshoot in the moment. And I think for us, when we think back to SWAP, I think my greatest reflection is the fact that we've had a lot of swap athletes who've gone on to become coaches, and it's fun to see that that offshoot happen. And I think it's like just a reflection of the fact that we do like it to be a co-coaching process.
And it's just super cool that they find meaning in the relationship so that they want to try to do that for others too. And so that's one of our biggest joys now that we've had this time is like, let's try to lift up other coaches, not just the ones we coach, but all of them, because we think it can be so meaningful. But the hardest part of coaching is getting started. Is all these other parts aren't necessarily like, there's a huge barrier to entry, and we're fortunate that we're at a place where hopefully we can try to help lift others up too. And that's why, what you're doing is incredible. And it's just really amazing that, you've used your platform to lift others up, not just in this context, but so many.
Oh, thank you. How do you, when you intake an athlete, obviously you have to know all the physical stuff, like where your history is, what your goals are. But I think what you both are known for so much in your coaching is that mental side that you talked about, and making sure that what we're doing, we're enjoying what we're doing, right? Why are we doing this if we're not enjoying it? So how do you intake an athlete as far as that side of the training goes, the mental side?
Yeah, so we ask a series of questions in every intake form. And then our last question, I think, is especially powerful. So the last question is, and hopefully you can correct me, it's been a little bit since I've onboarded an athlete, I've been full for a little bit, but it's, is there anything else you would tell a friend? And then question mark, and then any demons, question mark. And I think that's where we get some really informative answers. And I've been impressed with people's vulnerability right off the start of just answering that honestly. And I think it really drives the relationship, the coaching relationship forward. And I think it's been a meaningful question for us.
And the main thing we want is that there's a background of confidentiality with what's being said, and understanding that nothing they can do or say once we're in the corner, that nothing they can do or say will get us out of it, right? Like we're in it, we're together, we're a team, and so it's kind of like a reflection of what Megan and we've given each other, I think, where it's like, look, whatever you got going on, we got this, we're in this. And sometimes athletes are right off the bat ready to talk about, their mental health struggles, their divorces, whatever else they're going through. And other times it takes that building up of trust over time. But whatever it is, like the hope is, whether it's a pro athlete or someone just starting out, they view us as just that, like that friend that is there, right? That they don't have to doubt their affection or support. We're trying to give true unconditional, like, background, like a background beat of like, you got this, you are awesome. And as we work through this, we're not therapists, but we are really good at listening. And
we have good therapists and nutritionists. Yeah. And I think that's like one of the nice things is that we build up this team over time that we can refer out to, which is nice.
That's so important. I mean, when you're running this, you guys have a lot of athletes. And so that's so important that you have all those people that you can I know exactly the person to refer you to. How do you help someone bring the joy back? Because I'm sure you've seen it. When people come to you, they might come to you. I imagine some runners come to you simply for that reason, because they've lost the joy in running and they want to get faster, or they want to, complete their first 50, but they also have heard what you guys do in this community as far as helping people on that mental side of things. So what are things you do to help people get the joy back?
That's a great question. So I think often when people come to us, like simply reaching out is one of those things that often really helps. Like I think, it's really helpful for them to think about like starting this coaching journey. I think the other thing too is that often we normalize it. Like not having constant joy is something that's very normal. Like honestly, like, for us, like we're pretty joyful people. And I would say that 80% of our runs are joyful, maybe less than that. David's giving me a look.
I've touched. Joy is great, but I don't want athletes seeking joy. I want athletes seeking joy, dismay, like enthusiasm, despair. Like, we want running. It's cliche, but we want running to be a metaphor in their lives, right? Like if running is just running for joy, like it's always you're happy or what, like our book title was, like that is always going to end badly eventually.
Well, I think I'd also make the argument too that you can't truly know joy or happy until you've experienced the converse. And so I think, again, just like normalizing that to athletes, like, hey, this is like the full range of emotions you're going to go through as an athlete, and it's totally normal.
Yeah, and what's so cool about running is you step into that fire, and after you emerge from the fire, what can't you do?
Yeah.
So like that's what we want to emphasize. It's like, yeah, some of the athletes on the team are super freaking fast, but what we're really proud of for them is not that they won a race, it's that they showed up anyway. They put themselves out there, and anyone can do that, whether it's, you know, you're trying to win or you're just trying to see what you're capable of at age 80. And that each can be celebrated as close to equally as you can in the context of like, you know, still having a business that has to have a website and things like that.
You know, I feel like there's a lot of head cases out there like, oh, I'm scared of my speed work. I'm scared of my intervals. Like, I'm terrified to race because people are just scared of the pain. You know, they're afraid that they're going to quit. Not quit, but like slow down when they don't need to slow down, you know? So how do you coach people through that kind of stuff?
Well, I would say first, if you're not afraid, you are not thinking hard enough. And that's not just about running. That is about relationships. That is about recording a podcast. That is about almost everything you can possibly do in life. That, like, you know, the human condition is this background element of fear and uncertainty, or uncertainty that then, you know, we interpret as fear. So what we really try to emphasize is disconnect uncertainty from fear, right? Like, yeah, you don't know how your workout's going to go. Yeah, you don't know how your race is going to go. Yeah, you don't know anything in life, really. The things we control are so much more limited than our brains want us to think. But that doesn't mean we need to be scared of it. That means it can be something that becomes this like uplifting thing that we share with others. And, you know, I've personally, like, before I met Megan, I was afraid of so many things. And what she gave me was a net under my tightrope. So yeah, I'm on a tightrope, but there's a net right there. And that's kind of what running is. You're on a tightrope. Like, who knows what's going to happen? But there's a net. It's all good. It's going to end okay.
And I think the other two things that we do are just emphasizing the long-term process and then keeping it simple within that long-term process. So really emphasizing like this one race is just a stepping stone for the next 3 years. Like, it's not, this one race is not a judgment. It's not a test. It's a chance to just get to the starting line and get out there and have some fun. And same with workouts. And I think athletes embrace thinking like that, and then just keeping, like, we really keep our workouts simple, so everything's done by time as opposed to distance. So instead of having athletes go to the track and like hammer 6 by 1 minute or 6 by mile, we'll send them and do like, you know, 4 by 5 minutes or something that's just like a little bit easier in that context.
Well, this reminds me, Megan sometimes makes playlists for me for like hard workouts I do, so she's my coach. And she knew I was going up to really high altitude to do a workout, and one of the songs on the workout was, I think it was AJR or whatever. But one of the lines in there was like, 100 bad days make 100 good stories, and 100 good stories make me interesting at parties. And that's part of what we want to say, is that, you know, it's about the bad stories too.
That's so good. I love that. That makes you interesting at parties. Okay. Can we find these playlists? Because I want the playlist.
Actually, that's funny, and this is highly relevant. So we just talked on our podcast about the possibility of releasing a playlist. So we are definitely going to put one together, and I think it's going to start with Space Jam, and then it will get more serious and more sophisticated from there.
Well, mine would just be WAP, like 400 times. So
Megan, exact pronunciation of that.
Yeah, Megan's going to be
in charge.
We're
going to Google that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, yeah. Don't Google that at home, unless you have Safe Search on.
No,
I'm out of my league.
I love that too, though. When I get on a song, and especially if I'm doing like a hard workout and it's like that song is just doing it for me, yes, replay it like 5 or 6 times at least, because that'll get me going. I get that. I love that. So do you always listen to music when you run?
Sometimes. I mean, we mix it up. Like, I don't use it for the hardest efforts just because I'm not present with it anyway.
I listen to music all the time, actually. I recently got bone conduction headphones, which are kind of game changing. I like to hear my own breath in the music, but I would say that even though I listen to music all the time, I probably only hear it half the time, because, you know, my mind is either focused or, you know, not focused or doing other things. And so it's nice to kind of have that like tune in and tune out to the music.
Yeah, I wear the bone conduction too. I just feel so much safer when I use those instead of like an AirPod or whatever. Okay, so how do you decide who coaches who when an athlete reaches out to you guys for coaching?
Oh, there's no science to that. You know, I think we take generally similar approaches on pretty much everything. I think over time we've kind of grown like up, like kind of like those plants that kind of grow up with each other. So as a result, it ends up being like, you know, personality fit, but mostly just capacity. I mean, Megan does a lot of research projects and other things, and I'm mainly coaching, so that's often the way it works out. But, you know, I would trust Megan with my life, let alone like any athlete in the world. So it's just a totally random distribution.
I think for whatever reason, I happen to coach a number of physicians and scientists as well. It seems like when they reach out, I'm like, oh, I'll take them on. But it's nice because I've made this joke before. It's like if I ever need a GI consult or a dermatologist or like a surgeon, I'm like, I got my SWAT team.
That's
I can call
true.
someone.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so then talk about the community side of things. Like, how do you guys connect your athletes with one another and things like that?
So that was also another thing that I'm glad we didn't think about at first. What happened is, we started coaching people and we used to connect via email and things like that. And eventually the community people in the community themselves like self-created like a Facebook group and then self-created a Strava group. And those ended up being the hubs. So as much as like connecting directly to Facebook is kind of, awkward in the modern day, it's been the most uplifting place I've ever seen. And through that, the private group, people have made some like their best friends and
partners.
But yeah, tons of partners.
Yeah, we've actually joked that we should start a Some Work I'll Play dating website because we've had some great relationships form.
But it also scares me to death because I'm like, I just want everyone to be happy. And what happens if this doesn't end well? But it doesn't always end well. So, but
we've had that.
Yeah, but it's like a super interesting thing that hopefully what we're trying to do is in the process of being unapologetic about things like exclamation points, saying you are amazing, not being shy about owning what you're proud of, like that other people can then try to bring that into their own lives. And hopefully when they meet, like it also creates like a similar vibe there. And so, I think that is hopefully something we can broaden out beyond what even we're doing. And like with whoever, we can only coach so many people. It's like, well, then they'll coach people or they'll meet people and they'll tell them they are amazing. And like, not just like they are amazing as a passing thing, but like they are amazing with a ton behind it. So, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, but everyone uses it differently. It's like some people are so engaged and other people like, it's just us. And that's also super meaningful in its own way.
I love that. That's so good. How have you guys changed things just in the last few months with COVID and life being so weird right now?
I think just being a lot more flexible. So right now we have athletes. I mean, most athletes are not training for races just because races are kind of all over the place. And so just emphasizing to athletes that right now is a chance to like aerobically rebuild, to be flexible, to gain that like the appreciation of the long-term process. And it looks different for every athlete. And I think that's been kind of like the underscore of all our coaching is that like every athlete is so different in like our approach. Like, I don't think we have one holistic coaching approach that applies to everyone because everyone is just so different.
Yeah. So training methodology has definitely changed, as Megan indicated, like much more of a focus on, what it means to get aerobic development and running economy feeding back. But I think more than I was thinking about it as Lindsay was asking the question, and I'm like, we kind of cornered the market on this demographic because like our book, the first chapter is like screw results, right? It's all about process and like all these things. And I'm like, well, COVID sucks, but at least we didn't say all that matters is races because we'd be like, oh, wait, we take it back.
That's true.
You guys better be pushing that book right now.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's sold enough copies. I don't know if Megan agrees with me, but
I think your mom probably bought most of the copies. They're probably like chilling in her basement.
I don't know. I think that, it sold way more than we were ever expecting. And as a result, though, it also gives us heart palpitations sometimes.
That's true.
Because we're like, we were different people when we wrote that. And no, I mean,
yeah, every once in a while, a mentor or something will tell me they read the book.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
Like, you did what?
Like, I have read the book in my current form. But,
I totally know what you mean.
But that being said, like, even though we're joking, we also, like, gets back to, like, we do own it. Like, we're really proud of not just that, but, like, just we try to really emphasize the celebration aspect to everyone we're around. Like,
it's still horrifying though to put yourself out there.
Oh my God, you better believe it every day.
I can imagine. I mean, it's like I always tell people when they listen to this podcast, I'm like, do not listen to the first 50 episodes. Don't listen to the first 100 episodes. Don't do it because you do change. Like you evolve as a person, you evolve as a writer, your methodologies and coaching, everything you're constantly growing. So of course something you did or said or wrote 4 years ago is going to look different than how you would say it right now.
And I love that. I think the growth element is one of the coolest things about being a coach, and every coach probably gets it. You get this zoomed out view of a bunch of different lives. and you're super invested in those lives. And as a result, you see people go through everything that you could ever imagine, and their courage and strength, and also just how much they change over time, gives you this like kind of laid back wisdom. It's almost like why Buddha is smiling, you know? It's because Buddha is like, I get that. That sucks right now, but it'll be okay. Or whatever. It is what it is. And so, you know, I think that's a really cool thing about getting to be a coach, and why it's like the biggest honor that people would ever let us into their lives.
Okay, so you were talking about how you kind of changed up things a little bit with how things are with COVID and no races on the schedule. Talk about, I heard you guys talk about this. I don't know if it was the most recent podcast you did, but it was one of the last 3 or 4, talking about not overworking yourself, like not trying to be like in the fittest tip top shape at all times, but how just simply, you know, keeping up that consistent running is really good for what your fitness will be, you know, next season or next year.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're thinking about long-term growth, there are 2 big risks, and to really emphasize. The first is burning out. So like a general overarching psychological framework that we're all in. Like there's no inherent like worth in being a runner over doing other things with your life. So we're not saying you need to run, but we really want you to, right? And you know, the biggest risk is just falling off and being like, this isn't the life for me. And so that's the first thing to guard against. The second is burning up, I'm going to call it, which is talking about the actual physiological processes that could happen if you overdo it. Overtraining syndrome being the most obvious one, but far short of that, you know, we're seeing things like how, you know, making sure people eat enough, rest enough, training easy enough, feeding back into hormone production, into, you know, cortisol, into cellular level damage that can be undone, but has a much longer tail than we like it to. So those are the first 2 elements. And so what we really focus on in that context is, one, you know, as much aerobic volume as you're comfortable with, cross training, you know, easy running, all that. And 2 is, this is a great time to like embrace your speed, embrace your athlete. So, you know, our team, like if there's one thing that our training could be characterized as, you know, that Megan was getting to, it's a heavy emphasis on, we want people to be their fastest self year round. That doesn't mean their best racing mile self. It's not, like, we want people to be confident that they can, you know, do quick strides, stay in touch with their true athletic nature. And that really lets these feedback cycles start, where aerobic development feeds back into biomechanical neuromuscular development, and can create over 3 or 4 years an athlete that is nothing like the athlete that began. And
what I'm really interested in is using these cycles to create resiliency and build longevity. So what I emphasize with athletes is that, like, you know, periods of time where you're focusing less on running volume, perhaps right now during COVID, is a great time to work the biomechanics, to build the strength, to like support that overall foundation to give you more confidence as a resilient runner. And I think in turn, like, I love thinking about longevity in athletes and in runners. And some of the athletes that I've seen have strongest longevity are those athletes who embrace the down periods, who embrace the rest days. And I love emphasizing that to athletes, because who doesn't want to run until they're 80? You know, yeah. It's like, it's such a fun sport. And, you know, I think the longevity element of it is so key.
So does everyone on our team take a rest day now? I think so. Mm-hmm. Like a rest day a week. And that includes, like, you know, very, very top professional runners. It's one of the places that we've learned just not to compromise. Like
every runner.
Yeah, at least one. And many, even some pros, take two rest, or, you know, one is a cross training day. And it just gets back to, like, when we're talking about the risk of pushing into that fire is way greater than whatever benefit you might possibly get, though that could be debated too, by, you know, adding a little bit more. And so we're just like, let's stay away from the fire. Like, that's what we want to avoid. You know, all runners will step into it eventually. Like, it's a part of the game. But, like, when you're talking about longevity, like Megan was getting at, it's all about that process.
Well, I think real quick too, it's become a non-compromise point in terms of joining the team. Like, you have to be willing to accept that rest day to join SWAP.
Especially with pros. It's, and
I think people sometimes are resistant against it at first, and then they come to love it.
Yeah, I mean, some of our only bad experiences with pro runners has been people that really that don't do that. And I think where I've grown is being a little bit more confident. Like, I in the old days, I want people to be so happy so much that sometimes I would take the feedback from people and incorporate it in ways that weren't true, you know, to the scientific knowledge Megan has helped with, and also just our understanding of how systems work over time. So now we'll compromise on some things, but there are a few points that are just like stone cold. We cannot, like, that is just a place where there's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Wow. I feel like a lot of athletes would be like, thank God. Like, I want that rest day. Now, when you say rest day, is it complete rest or do you allow them to cross train?
Often it does involve some cross
Almost
training.
all, but it's almost all complete rest.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, they can walk around. They walk around. Like, we want you to live your life and be active and things. But, if biking is great, but that type of compulsion of like needing to constantly scratch an itch, one, it's a lot psychologically, but two, it has the same hormonal impacts as running does. And what we want athletes to feel good almost all the time and be their healthiest self. And so having that backstop of insurance of a day where you can just reset is worth it. Even if you feel a little bit crappier the next day, like you turn the clock forward 3 months and especially 3 years, and you're probably going to be thankful you took those.
Wow, it's so refreshing to hear. Can you talk about the hormone balance a little bit more and why that's important? Those rest days are so important to that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot of recent studies that have come out on this. And essentially, what they get at is that taking stress away from the body in any form is a key element in how hormones balance over time. So there's a lot of examples of that. The main ones being with cortisol and stress hormone, which almost all running will produce to some extent. The other is, as you look at like fueling, so glycogen availability. The most fascinating studies I've seen recently are within day energy deficits. And I think this might be important to some people listening. So I'll just tease it out a little bit. And Megan, just cut me off when you have anything that's more important than what I'm saying. And so what those studies looked at is they controlled for daily caloric intake and looked at what percentage of those days were people in deficit. So even with the same amount of calorie intake, being in deficit for longer periods of time, even though those periods of time were not that great in relation to the overall portion of the day, caused these massive hormonal perturbations, which for female athletes, led to menstrual cycle disturbance, and for male athletes led to sex drive issues and testosterone issues. And that's like stress defined in a very unique way. And when we're looking at rest days, we're essentially looking at a similar concept. It's like by taking the stress off, you're not just letting your body rebuild glycogen, you're, actually allowing things to heal on a cellular level.
What I think is interesting, though, about those studies is it gets at the field of exercise physiology in general, where you're isolating one variable in a very controlled set of settings. And it's hard to generalize that to the rest of the population because you're just looking at these very minute things. What I emphasize to athletes is that, like, the rest of life also feeds into this equation too. And that's not being measured in the exercise physiology study. So it's like, you stay up late one night because you're a parent and that produces cortisol. You're working a busy job, that produces cortisol. Or like maybe your job makes it so that it's difficult to get in that consistent snacking to have that positive energy balance. And so I really emphasize that it's just like, it's thinking about like life also in the context of training, and rest days help create that buffer for the rest of life as well.
Maybe a rest day for some athletes is like a 20% risk for like a really high injury rate athlete. Maybe for other athletes, it's a 0.001% risk. But our general thinking is, let's just control risk. Like, while we want to go for it, we want to shoot those shots. We want to shoot the shots when they count. Like we want to make the days we do be fun and uplifting and joyous. But like, if we can control even a little bit of risk with almost no downside, let's do it.
Wow. That was good. You guys schooled us. I love that. What do you do for injury prone athletes? Like, do you guys have a pretty strong like cross training ideals and things like that? I'm the type of person that I have found that if I run 5+ days a week, like something's going to get injured. It's just going to happen. Even if I'm doing strength training and whatnot. So I've just found like, I think I'm coming off a recent injury, which is so annoying. I just ran for like 8 minutes today. It was wonderful.
Oh, yay!
That's such a good feeling. I'm so pumped,
Yeah, it felt good. I did like 2 minutes running, 1 minute walking for 15 minutes or something like that. But yeah, I think that coming off that, I'm just like, I think 4 days is my max. Like, I don't know if there's any specific science to that. And I enjoy biking and doing other things. So I get in these cycles though where I want to run more because I love feeling fit, and I think my happiest place is probably 5 days a week, but Yeah, how do you deal with athletes that are kind of injury prone?
Yeah, I think just starting with normalizing it. So I look at the genetics of sports injury, and there's still so much to be learned in this field, but just really emphasizing that, like, that being injury prone is not necessarily your fault, and in many cases is definitely not your fault. You know what I mean? And so just normalizing that to athletes and saying, like, hey, this is just something that we're gonna work around, and we're gonna find joy in cross training. And I think athletes, we've had a number of athletes who train on 4 or 5 days a week, do well in ultra running, do well on the roads. And I think, like, athletes seeing other athletes doing that has helped in the process. And so we have a few different formulas that we use for biking. So we emphasize a lot of high cadence, high RPM intervals on the bike. And we find that translates well to the run just because it seems to reinforce some of those neuromuscular patterns. So that's something that we emphasize. We see athletes who have success with the elliptical, swimming, all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, in cross training, and just not, you don't need to run as much as like, maybe like Once a Runner, the book told you need to run. I mean, we are big fans of high volume for some of our athletes. Like there are some athletes on the team that do like the classic heavy training that you know. There are others. Scotty Hawker last year, third at UTMB, for those that don't know, is a 106-mile race, one of the biggest in the world, on 42 miles a week, 4 or 5 days a week.
Wow.
And like at in his late 30s. And the idea being like, different things work for everyone, and it's much less about your body doesn't know the number of miles you're doing, it knows the stress it's under. So your body doesn't know miles, it knows stress. And so when it comes to your stress, like 4 days a week, a little bit, 1 or 2 days of cross training and a rest day, your body can adapt to almost its maximal level, probably its absolute max. And that's freaking awesome. And the hard part is embracing it, understanding that like the process of being an athlete doesn't mean hitting numbers. It means like feeling confident in, your ability to get out there and do these things. And then when you get injured, it's like, it gets back to the shooting your shot thing. Like injury is a product of shooting your shot. Like if anything, we want athletes to celebrate injury, even as they try to, take steps to avoid it in the future, because it means like, you're not getting injured on the couch. So putting yourself out there is something we always want people to be like, heck yeah, I did.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I can't remember if it was Claire. I think it was Claire Gallagher that when I interviewed her, like I was surprised at how low her mileage was in training.
Yeah, and a lot of it gets back to background and genetics, right? Like
sure.
we don't want to oversell like what Claire did, because Claire, I mean, I've just
Claire is an N of one, and she's an N of fiery one. Like she's an amazing human.
She could probably be coached by a magic 8-ball. But I mean, on a broader scale, like, Kat Drew last year was top 10 at Western States on 48 miles a week, like, and that's a 100-miler. And we've had athletes run, blazing fast, like trials level, track races on very, very low volume. And the idea being like, volume is one way to get at adaptations, but there are many ways to get at similar adaptations. And like, not to pigeonhole yourself in like what someone else is doing, because that comparison game might not just be counterproductive for you. It might be like actively destructive to your long-term growth.
And just emphasizing consistency too. Like I would rather an athlete hit 30 or 40 miles a week, like consistently, than have like 80, then 0, then 80, then 0. And I think reinforcing that to athletes is also helpful too.
Yeah. And growth is nonlinear in general. Like the things that we've seen over time from beginners to pros, it's like you can't predict based on the background training that you see on Strava necessarily, though you get a little better at it with time. And so, even as coaches, we're like, we don't have control over the certainty elements of this. So in the face of that uncertainty, we mainly want to focus on, is this person fulfilled, or are they happy, or whatever you want to call that phrase? And is this person not destroying themselves? If you control those two variables, people will get very close to their ceiling over time, over the course of many years. But most people don't get to that many years point, right? Like the point of going all in for an extended period of time. And so, when we're talking about putting your chips on the table, it might not mean like sacrificing everything you ever have, just putting a few in at a time. And over time, you'll be like, crap, I went all in. It just took, a few years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when we were talking about the burning up and the hormones and keeping everything, like the stress and everything, do you guys talk to your athletes about that? Megan, you were talking about life in general, like you stayed up late because you're a baby or whatever. Do you talk to them about like, hey, you need to put work down for a day and like take a day off mentally as well?
We've definitely had that conversation. I think it's pretty obvious in the logs, and sometimes it's not explicitly stated, but you can just kind of see the general trend of, and I feel like we know athletes so well at this point that sometimes it comes out, and even just like minor comments about frustrations or things like that. And what I love about coaching is just pattern recognition over time. And I think that's a very interesting pattern recognition, is to sense when someone just needs that day off, whether it's work or running or whatever it may be.
I mean, Megan did that for me this weekend. Like I haven't taken a day off. Like I wouldn't call it work, but whatever you call it.
You still answered emails though, so it's a day off with an asterisk.
But for me, it really felt like a day off.
Yes.
On Sunday for the first time in ages, and and so it was really cool actually. Like I checked back into the logs on Monday, and athletes were like, David, it really was amazing that you just took a day, and it was really meaningful to me. But it's like, a lot of this stuff, everything we're saying is easier said than done.
Sure.
But what our goal is to have athletes understand their own stress a little bit more, and be like, I am not a weak person because I am stressed. I am a human, and being a human is what it's all about. We don't want to coach machines.
And then before we do into podcast questions, I just want to hear you talk a little bit about looking at the big picture as far as, this is just running. Even though we want to work hard and kill some fast times and do all the things, like in the grand scheme of life, it's just running.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I think in coaching, we use running as a proxy for life often. And I think when we look at the big picture, I think we often encourage athletes to take risks with running, because I think it fosters that risk taking in life that like allows people to feel fulfilled, allows people to feel like they're going for it, and that like just brings that overall satisfaction. And so I think that's like a big area that we emphasize with the big picture, is just like, as David said before, shoot your shot, go for it.
And the reason we emphasize that so much, that it's a quote from an author named Shea Serrano, or at least that's how we came across it. And I think it just emphasizes the personality and perspective we want athletes to have related to their athletic lives. And hopefully it extends to other things too. It's like, I'm not putting pressure on myself. Like I'm just going down and I'm just shooting my shot. Like, and the point isn't that, making it or not matters. The point is that self-belief practice of taking the shot and thinking it's going to go in, and even though you only make so many, that's what it's about. And that, like, we're only here for a short period of time. It's all relatively meaningless if you dig down deep enough into its core, not just running, but other things too. And so the great power is like raging against the dark night. And that's what we're doing with shooting our shot. It's like, take that dark night, see what I can do as a human. I can shoot this shot, even though, I know where it all ends anyway.
I love it. All right, guys. What's one thing professionally or personally that you'd like to do that you haven't done yet?
David's pointing at me.
I am pointing at her.
Megan first.
I would like to do Western States 100.
Ooh.
I like that answer. Lindsay, you've motivated me. I'd like to write another book, but something not about running. I'd like to hopefully shoot my own shot in an uncomfortable way that leads to nothing, and practice some of my own advice. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm excited. What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
I think for me, my decision not to go to medical residency, it's a journey that not a lot of medical students take. And it was one that was very scary for a couple of months, and just feeling proud of taking that risk.
Yeah. And for me, it's just being willing to put that little janky Blogspot website up there all those years ago and find that like my calling was in a totally different direction than I thought. And being like, I don't care that I have $200,000 of student loans or whatever, that like this path, like, as Megan pointed out, we just watched this movie Palm Springs on Hulu, which is amazing. But the idea at the end is like, having a buddy through this crazy thing that just goes in circles is part of the idea. And so Megan gave me that courage. And so thank you.
Is it a feel-good movie?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a very feel-good movie.
Yeah.
And it's fun. A feel-good movie is kind of our jam.
The listeners will probably know, but the montage scene in that movie, we were laughing so uncontrollably hard. I think we peed all over the couch.
Well, that's the only kind of show I'm willing to watch like before bed, which is why my husband and I like watch shows in different rooms, because he likes to watch like The Leftovers and like all of this like deep, dark stuff. And I just, Perry something or another right now. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about? What movie I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think Perry Mason. I think you would love this, actually, because it does have its dark moments. It is a deeper story. It has leftovers elements to it, but I mean, I don't want to give away the ending. I'll just say you'll like it too.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I think he's all caught up though. And I'm like, man, he always tells me, he's like, if I could change one thing about you, it would be that you would be a better TV and movie watcher.
I love that.
I empathize with you. It's hard. I feel like I get to that time of night and I'm like, just give me something that's joyful and uplifting,
Yes.
and I'm not going to carry it into nightmares.
We've
so
been
I hear
really
you on
we've
that.
been really into
Yes.
Scrubs. We rewatched
Oh,
Scrubs.
that's fun.
And there's a podcast along with Scrubs, Fake Doctors, Real Friends by the Stars. It is the ultimate joy in my life. So if you're looking for something to just like start it new and have a podcast that you can listen to when you run, today, for example, I was laughing so hard on my run that I had to stop at the podcast. So it's a
Okay.
good, like,
I never got into Scrubs, so maybe that'll be because I literally I retweeted someone the other day. They said I finished Netflix. And I'm like, I feel that so hard. At least all of the Netflix that I want to watch, like All American, Outer Banks, like all the fun, like just you know, comedy drama type shows.
I love
Okay, who is someone fun, motivating, or inspiring that you'd like to have coffee, tea, or cocktail with?
I like this question. So my initial thought was Michelle Obama because she's brilliant and I love the career swerves that she's made. But something in the back of my mind is now saying Michelle Wolf, who is a great comedian, super funny, and an ultra runner, which is why I chose that because I feel like there's a lot of connections we could talk about.
Yeah, I know. We need to get her in somewhere called Play. Maybe someone listening will know her personally.
If anyone knows Michelle Wolf, let her know we are out here.
Oh yeah, and her most recent comedy special was amazing. She is so great. Mine will be Lin-Manuel Miranda. I just like the way he brings. I mean, he's clearly brilliant, but the way he brings that complexity into the world with such love and acceptance, I think is like it's such a courageous thing for him to do. You know, like it's so much easier to see the honesty of the world and come out jaded or whatever, and he chooses to do the opposite. And I think that would be really cool. Actually, him and Shea Serrano at the same table, I'd be in heaven. I just would be hyperventilating.
We're both cheating and choosing multiple people.
Well, I thought you were going to say Lizzo.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think Lizzo would be. Yeah, she's also brilliant. I mean, all these people are so cool. I think basically Megan and I would love to answer 1 billion people right now. It's one of our favorite things in the world is to
We play this game a lot.
have dinner with people and just like talk about anything. I mean, that's what our podcast is essentially, is our dinner conversation recorded.
I think everybody listening needs to come at me because I've never seen Hamilton. I didn't even watch it when it came out on Netflix or wherever it came out, Disney, and I've never listened to the musical. I've never even listened to it.
You know, the thing is though, you're saving a present.
Okay.
We all opened our presents years ago for the most part. At some point, you'll be like 65 and you'll be like, you know what? They always said, I think it's overrated, and then you listen to it and your ears will blow out of your skull and you'll be like, man, well, that was amazing. And so we'll all be jealous at that point.
Oh, that's such a good way to look at it. I know one of my favorite podcasts, the Popcast, they do like breakdowns of different pop culture things, and they did a whole episode on Hamilton, and it did make me kind of want to watch or listen or whatever, because the one there's 3 of them on the show, and the one guy, he was the skeptic, and he's like, it's so good I can't even talk about it. So
it's great running music. We've been at Lactate Threshold a lot to Hamilton,
and it gets back to the creative process. I think that's why it resonates so much with us. Is like how Lin-Manuel Miranda put himself out there and created this thing that makes no freaking sense. We are not musical people. It is not our style at all. Like, and it's objectively brilliant whether we like it or not. And it's just such a lesson of being like, I mean, talk about shooting your shot. I heard that for the first time. It took me a year to listen to it the first time because I was like, that is the most musical theater thing I've ever heard. And it turns out that, oh no, it's just like the most honest piece of art that like anyone's created in our time.
okay, maybe my goal will be before the episode gets published to watch it.
Oh,
is it still on Disney Plus? Can I still get it? Can I still
get
it? Okay, it's still there. Okay. Let's see, where are we? Okay, what's the most recent book you've read?
So the last book I read was by Issa Rae, who's a comedian, and she is on HBO's Insecure, and she wrote the book The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, and it is funny. It's really good. And I think in light of the recent Black Lives Matter movement, I just have a lot of education and learning to do, and this was like a fun comedic way to learn from her, and I was really grateful for that.
I love that. I'm going to go Girls Running by Melody Fairchild and Elizabeth Carey, which I don't know when this comes out, but
Today.
But when the podcast comes
when
out.
the podcast comes out, yeah.
I don't want to date the podcast. But you know, it's just a really great look at stories that need to be told and need to be shared more often. So I also love Elizabeth and Melody. So plug for Girls Running.
I love that. Actually, Emma, who you guys have been emailing with her, my production assistant, she actually texted me and said that she would be a good guest on the show, Melody.
Oh, yeah.
She'd be great. Her story, I love her story. And she's just such an engaging, warm person that I think she'd be awesome.
You have a story with her, right? Like,
we raced each other at Leadville, and I didn't know who she was. And I was like, who is this person?
And then so to give you an idea of how Melody is, like, so after the Leadville race, she was like, Megan, you should go to the mountain running championships, right? Like, and the mountain running championships kind of, from there, our whole lives changed because we really got exposed to a world we hadn't been in as much before. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I don't know if she even knows that story, but.
Oh, that she was like part of you guys exploring that part of your journey.
Yeah.
And she was so inspirational about mountain and trail running in general that I think it just like, and her warm soul, we were like, we must go to the mountain running championships after she told us this.
Yeah. And, you know, who knows where Summer Golf Play would be now. And it gets back to the butterfly effect of all the different people in your lives where, you know, one little thing can make so much difference without it necessarily being a seismic shift in what you do or how you do it. And so, yeah, we hope to be that spark for as many people as we can, even if it doesn't catch. Like, the more sparks we can light, the better.
That's so cool. I love that. Yeah, and it's August 11th today when we're recording this. I'm not sure when it's dropping either, but that means the book is out, so you can get it.
I think it's dropping the day after you watch Hamilton.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of reading, listening, watching. I've got a lot to do. It is one of my favorite things about the podcast, though, is when I ask the book question because I always get really good recommendations, and it's fun. Okay, here it is. What's your one message to send to the world?
My one message, I'm actually going to popcorn you because I'm going to think about this one more.
You are freaking amazing. Like, and you are amazing doesn't mean that you're achieving something or whatever. It means that you're out there and, you know, your spirit is shining however it's shining. And there's so much beauty in that. And like, yeah, we want to delve into all these questions of meaning, but, you know, at the end of the day, who the hell knows? You know, what we do know is that we're in this thing, whatever it actually is, together. And by like lifting each other up and trying to accept our own beauty, like that's where the magic of actually being alive comes.
And I'm going to follow that with you are enough, which we say often, and it's kind of the theme of our book, but I think it's just such an important thing to keep reemphasizing. And I think I'll add to that too, is that you are enough, even if you don't think you're enough all of the time, because I think a lot of times athletes, like, it's very normal to wake up and look in the mirror and just be like, I'm having a hard time today. And like, just knowing that like you're enough throughout that journey, even if you don't always think it, I think is an important thing.
Yeah. And talk to a therapist.
Yeah.
That's a final message. Yeah, we appreciate you so much, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was so fun.